about the status of Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. First of all, I'm glad Chairman Grassley has started to listen to members telling him he can't simply sweep this under the rug. It's not just going to go away, and I'm glad Republican leaders are starting to realize that. But scheduling a hearing for Monday, a week from when Dr. Ford made her accusations public, is a shameful attempt to jam this through without giving anyone the time they need to investigate and put together the questions that need to be asked. And think about this from Dr. Ford's perspective. She first talked about this publicly on Sunday. On Monday night, Republicans scheduled a hearing with her, or confirming with her, or even giving her a heads up. Not only that, but right now Republican leaders are trying to prevent any outside witnesses beyond Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh from appearing, which would be unprecedented and wrong. And now some Republicans are already saying a vote will come a few days later. This is what happened in 1991 when the Senate got information in the middle of a process. A hearing was jammed in just days later. And you know what? I hoped we could do better 27 years later. Unfortunately, Republican leaders seem focused above all else on getting Judge Kavanaugh on the bench, whatever that takes, as quickly as possible. They should be focused on doing their jobs, making sure that we are scrutinizing this nominee and not rushing him into a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. We need a full, fair, robust investigation into these allegations of a serious criminal act. And only when that is completed should we bring Dr. Ford in for testimony and Judge Kavanaugh in once again, along with any other relevant witnesses. And that brings me to my second point. I am a United States Senator today because of the way Anita Hill was treated in 1991. I, along with millions of other women, watched in horror as an all-male Judiciary Committee interrogated, berated, and maligned a woman who was brave enough to speak up about an issue it would have been far easier for her personally to remain silent on. Some of them are still on this committee today. They called Anita Hill a liar. They said she was coached by special interest groups. They looked for ways to blame her, impugn her, and attack her. It was disgusting, and it motivated women to vote, to run for office, and fight for change. Now, a whole lot has changed since 1991. The Me Too movement has sparked a greater awareness of the issues of sexual harassment and assault. Men and women across the country now understand more than ever that women give up so much when they come forward, and that the presumption should be that they are telling the truth. But a whole lot has not changed. The Republican side of the Judiciary Committee looks exactly as the committee did in 1991. All men. One committee member who led the attack on Anita Hill in 1991 is already saying Dr. Ford may be, quote, mixed up. And Republican media outlets are already trying to smear her. So I am here today to say, once again, women are watching. We are not going to allow that to happen again. If Republicans attack Dr. Ford and this turns into anything like what we saw back in 1991, women across the country are going to rise up, make their voices heard, and Republicans will pay a very huge price. Now, I am hoping that that does not happen. I am hoping that Republicans treat Dr. Ford fairly, work with us to investigate this accusation fully, and don't try to jam this nominee through. This is a test for the United States Senate on how we handle accusations of sexual harassment and assault. I am hoping this Senate passes it. With that, let me turn it over to Senator Hirono.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Murray, and I'm glad to stand here with the rest of my colleagues to point out that not only do women like Dr. Ford, who bravely comes forward, need to be heard, but they need to be believed. They need to be believed. So you know, her account is very credible. Also, the fact that she hardly needs to open herself to the kinds of attacks that have already come her way, that just adds to her credibility. So I believe her. I just had a lunch with some people today who told me that one person told me that his sister had been the subject of a sexual harassment situation, and a lot of times it becomes a he said, she said. He said it was really important to hear me, say that I believe Dr. Ford. So it's shocking, but not surprising, that President Trump is not okaying an FBI investigation so that there's at least some attempt at corroboration. So what does this mean? That the entire array of the power of the White House is behind Judge Kavanaugh, but there's not even an FBI investigation that the president can authorize, but he won't, which is not surprising. And so this whole thing is, you have the power of the White House, Kavanaugh over here, and this totally disadvantages Dr. Ford. Not only does it disadvantage her, but it victimizes her. Haven't we been here before with the Clarence Thomas hearings? So just as my colleague has called on the women in this country to pay attention, to rise up, I expect all of the enlightened men in our country, because there must be millions of men out there who are enlightened, who also will rise up to say, we cannot continue the victimization and the smearing of someone like Dr. Ford. And you know what? She is under no obligation to participate in the Republican efforts to sweep this whole thing under the rug, to continue this nomination on the fast track, and to participate in a smear campaign and basically a railroad job. So this is what they did to Anita Hill, and this is what they're trying to do with Dr. Ford. It is time for all of us to say, end this kind of treatment of people who come forward when they don't need to talk about very painful parts of their life experiences, because they truly care about who sits on the Supreme Court in a lifetime appointment to make decisions that will impact all of our lives. And I want to thank Dr. Ford. I commend her courage. I believe her.
Let me just say right at the outset, I believe Dr. Ford. I believe the survivor here. There's every reason to believe her. She has come forward courageously and bravely, knowing that she would face a nightmare of hostile and vicious scrutiny and challenge. And there are plenty of reasons to disbelieve Judge Kavanaugh after his evasive and seemingly misleading testimony before the Judiciary Committee. The simple fact here is that so far, the Republican leadership has completely disrespected this survivor. They have summoned her to a hearing without consulting her as to the date, without even apparently contacting her directly. She may well have learned about it through the press. They have accorded her not even the minimal respect that any prosecutor would give a survivor in a criminal proceeding or investigation. And I will just tell you, as a former United States attorney and attorney general of my state and someone who is familiar with the way prosecutors work, there's no way that any prosecutor would put on a witness stand a crime victim without doing a full investigation. It would be a disservice to the survivor, to fairness and justice. That's what Republicans are doing here. They have no interest in the truth or justice. They simply want to ram through this nomination. This proceeding is more like something out of Russia than the United States of America. It is unworthy of the United States Senate. There is no way that we should have this hearing without having a full, fair investigation. There is no way to fairly have this hearing without the corroborating witnesses coming forward as well. What's been proposed is simply a sham and a mockery of a full Senate hearing. I've written a letter today, joined by Senator Leahy and Senator Jones, to Don McGahn, the White House counsel, asking him when he first knew about these allegations, what he did to investigate them, and what other allegations there may be of a similar nature against Judge Kavanaugh. He has played a unique role in choosing and vetting judicial nominees. He was the one who recommended Rob Porter to his position as staff secretary, despite many people knowing about his domestic violence issues. We want to know when he knew about these allegations and what he did to investigate them. Second, we want to know when the letter signed by 65 of Judge Kavanaugh's former schoolmates was first started. It appeared, as you'll recall, the day after the letter surfaced publicly. There must have been some preparation for it. That would be common sense. And I believe that the answers to those questions from Don McGahn will be extremely revealing. Let me just say finally that I hope we've learned something from the Anita Hill proceeding of 27 years ago, that a full investigation is necessary, that corroborating witnesses are essential, but most important, that survivors deserve basic respect, which right now the Republican leadership is failing to give Dr. Ford. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Murray. The Republicans' interest in speedy Supreme Court confirmation processes is novel and new. The Republicans were not in a hurry when Justice Scalia passed away. They were not in a hurry to move that process forward. And I think we have to remember that ultimately it's not necessarily our job to be judge and jury over these kind of serious allegations. We ultimately are here to represent the views of our constituents, of the people that we serve back home. And so this rush job to bring a hearing with very few witnesses and no independent determination of fact is an insult to the American people, not just to the traditions and the history of the Senate. It gives no time for the American people to come to a conclusion as to the facts and give their own recommendation to their member of the Senate. No matter how rigorously President Trump attacks the FBI and the Department of Justice, the American people still have faith in the FBI's impartiality. They want the FBI to do their due diligence and to present their findings, not just to the Senate, but to the American public as well. There's no reason to move this process this fast. There's no reason not to make sure that the Senate and the American people don't get a full picture of the allegations that are being presented. Republicans have come recently to the view that there is no time to waste in pushing Supreme Court nominations through the process. I hope that they remember their disposition from 2 years ago.
Dr. Christine Blasey Ford is a courageous woman. Her account is credible, and I believe her. And what the Republicans are doing to her today is exactly why so many survivors do not come forward. She reluctantly told her story for the first time to a reporter before Kavanaugh was named. Her account is specific. She told her therapist 5 years ago. She told a friend last year. She passed a polygraph test, and she has everything to lose because of her bravery in coming forward. We've already seen the consequences to her life, And as my colleagues have said, we must learn the lessons from 27 years ago. We must learn the lessons from what happened to Anita Hill by this Senate. We have to determine whether Judge Kavanaugh has the fitness and the moral character to serve in the highest court of the land and make decisions that will affect millions of women's lives. So where do we go from here? We should not be rushing to judgment with a sham hearing on Monday that is designed solely to create a he said atmosphere, assassinating her character. Why rush to judgment to fit an arbitrary political agenda? The American people deserve the facts about Judge Kavanaugh. They deserve the facts about his personal character. There are corroborating witnesses, and they too must be called, including Mark Judge, who was allegedly in the room, and the therapist who counseled Dr. Blasey Ford in 2012, and other expert witnesses who would both be an expert in sexual assault and crimes, trauma, and PTSD associated with the survivor being attacked. It is shameful that the Senate Judiciary Committee plans on repeating the ugly piece of history by doing to Dr. Blasey Ford exactly what they did to Anita Hill by putting her on the stand alone. What are they afraid of getting? Are they afraid of the truth? Second, before any hearing moves forward, as my colleagues have so acutely said, the FBI has to be allowed to complete their background check. This is the background check they do for all nominees. The previous background checks did not have this information to look at. And it's shameful that the White House Department of Justice hasn't instructed them to do that yet at this point. So we need a thorough, independent investigation, free of partisan politics, to inform the questions and allow for a fair hearing of the facts. Anything less than that will put a permanent cloud over this process that will not be removed. I say to my fellow Republican colleagues, do not rush this process. We must get it right. A sham hearing would send a very clear message that women are not valued in this country. To refuse to treat this properly and try to confirm Judge Kavanaugh at any cost tells women that once again they are not important and they are not to be believed, that you are worth less than a man's promotion. This isn't just about any one incident. It's about whether we will send more women back to the shadows who have experienced sexual trauma. This is not who we are as a nation. This is not who we are striving to be as a nation. We have come a long way since 1991, and this country deserves much better.
Thank you. I'll take questions, but I want to say one more thing as someone who is standing in front of you because of how the Anita Hill hearings were handled. There are lessons to be learned, and one of the consequences of how that was handled is it left a generation of women 27 years ago with the knowledge that if they come forward, they will not be taken seriously, they will be berated, and they will not be able to get through with a fair hearing. Let us not have that be this lesson this time. Let this Senate show how you can handle this fairly and justly with a hearing that is fair to the person who's come forward so that we send a message right now, the United States Senate, that women can come forward when they've been sexually assaulted and will not be berated but will be treated fairly. That is the lesson I want my two young granddaughters to see out of this today.
Senator, if there is not an investigation done by the FBI, are you recommending that Ford does not come and testify?
I have not talked to her. I don't believe that...
Through your public statements.
What I believe is for us as the United States Senate to send the message that she is going to be treated fairly. And as my colleagues, who are all lawyers and I am not, have said that in order to do that, we need a thorough investigation so the senators who are on the committee have the information they need in order to ask the questions fairly of both of them.
Senator Murray, what do you ascribe the reticence of Ford's counsel of even getting back with the committee? Does that mean that they are not interested in coming?
Let's redo this timeline. This is a woman who was reticent to come forward, and we all understand why. Every one of us understands why. She finally came forward on Sunday. On Monday, the chairman of the committee announced a hearing in a week without consulting her. To be treated fairly, she should have at least been asked if she was available that day, and he should have said how they're going to have an investigation in order for her to know she's going to be treated fairly. I cannot answer for her. I have not talked to her. but I certainly believe that that would have been a fair way to handle this that did not occur.
If Republicans do not address the concerns that you've raised and they decide to go forward, have you guys considered recourse in terms of trying to address that going forward? Is there something you
Look,
can do procedurally?
I will ask some members of the committee who are here, who probably can answer that better than I can.
You know, I'll just speak for myself. This survivor is a woman of intense and incredible courage. And if she's at this hearing, I want to be there to make sure that some rules of fairness are followed, that her courage is matched by our fight to protect her against abuse and unfairness that is expectable in light of how it has been scheduled and planned. And, you know, the idea that the burden is put on her to justify reluctance to appear before a committee with no notice, little opportunity to prepare, without even an interview by the FBI. She hasn't been interviewed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in connection with a serious allegation against a nominee for the United States Supreme Court that is credible and real. The burden should be on the committee to accommodate her schedule, but most important, to do an investigation, do some fact-finding. Otherwise, we're going to have just a kangaroo court and a mock and a charade.
Let me just add one
Amazing.
thing here. I think we all know when something is unfair, when something smells, and we all know this. Let's face it, this is so patently unfair to her, and what really bothers me and gets me so angry is that the White House is victimizing this person. Why don't we get that out there? That why should we participate in a victimization of someone who has the courage to come forward? And she is under absolutely no obligation to participate in a smearing of her and her family. And that is why I am very clear about what needs to happen, but at the same time, you know, if the Republicans go forward with their plan to railroad this and to fast track this as they have so many other nominations, I expect the members of the press to talk about how unfair this all is. I don't think that's editorializing, that's laying out some facts. I expect that from you guys.
Do you think that... You're one of just 4 women on the committee.
Yes.
How does that impact the proceedings, if at all?
Of course it helps that there are women on that committee, but you know what? I expect the men in this country and the men in this committee, and many of them, believe me, because we all signed on to this letter to demand an FBI investigation, but really, guess who's perpetuating all of these kinds of actions? It's the men in this country, and I just want to say to the men in this country, just shut up and step up. Do the right thing for a change. Okay, you can see I'm a little upset by this, you know, the unfairness of it, but you have a second question?
What, if anything, could Judge Kavanaugh say in this hearing that would convince you that he didn't do what he accused of?
He is saying that he didn't do it. What else can he say? So I set that aside, and I look at what Dr. Ford is saying, and we've all said she makes a very credible claim. And she's already undergone a number of bases on which we draw our conclusions. I think it is really important. There are some of us who have been in politics for a long time, as I have. And believe me, I know, having done some of the research and read about how difficult it is in sexual harassment cases, that most of the time women don't come forward, because why? As my colleague Kirsten Gillibrand has mentioned, they're usually not believed. So we have to create an environment where women can come forward and be heard and be listened to, and the proper channels and the proper investigation should occur. And that is certainly not happening here.
Senator Grassley says he is going to set up calls with Mark Judge and other witnesses that will demonstrate
Democrats take part in those calls, or do they boycott?
We want all of this to be out in the open under oath. Why do they continue to think that this is something that they can just push under the rug and, oh, let's just have a call with certain staff, not all the staff? Believe me, this is so important. We're talking about a nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court, a lifetime appointment.
Yeah, I just think about how she would feel if she was called by Republican staffers on a call that no one else can hear and she's being asked questions. That puts her again in a very unfair predicament that she can't trust. That is why we are calling for an investigation, an assessment of the facts, for other witnesses to be talked to, and then have this hearing.
Senators, but if the investigation isn't, if Republicans don't go along with the concerns that you guys have, which is an FBI investigation, hearing from these witnesses in public testimony, then what is the next step for Democrats?
Well, I don't know all the answers to that because those are all if, but I would say this. I call on the American people, women and men, to judge whether this is done fairly.
Since,
to withdraw already, like right now?
Pardon?
Is it enough to call on Judge Kavanaugh to withdraw this nomination? It seems like you're stopping short of saying that and just saying all the
you know, I have opposed his nomination.
Yeah, from the beginning.
I've opposed it from the beginning. I think the nomination should be withdrawn. He has raised serious doubts about his credibility in his testimony already. He's been evasive and seemingly misleading. And the bar here is not whether you have not criminally assaulted someone, it's credibility, trust, integrity. But since Mazie has called for men to step forward, let me just
There are
say,
enlightened people around here, men and women.
let me just say to my Republican colleagues, now is the time for you to step forward, speak out, stand up for our institutions in this country, for the rule of law, because this nomination will not only cast a shadow over Judge Kavanaugh if he were ever to be confirmed, it will also stain the United States Supreme Court irreparably. And remember, the United States Supreme Court has no armies, has no police force. People obey the United States Supreme Court's orders because of its trust and credibility. It will undercut and decisively diminish the trust and confidence of the American people in the United States Supreme Court if Judge Kavanaugh is rushed to confirmation without an FBI investigation, without a fair proceeding through a kind of kangaroo court process that ignores the rights and respect that survivors deserve.
Thank you all very much.